Welcome to Age Pension, Super and Retirement. I'm your host Yvonne, and as always, this is information only and not personal advice. Today we will be looking at gifting, a topic that is often discussed in our Facebook group. Rebecca, who is our expert in that area, has in fact created posts and quizzes to help understand this area. I would like to welcome back Rebecca to unpack gifting. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, Yvonne. It's good to be here again.
In a general way, could you please explain the gifting rules for the age pension, please?
Yeah, I sure can. Almost everyone can explain the gifting rule.
Yes.
But a lot of people don't understand what it means. So I'm going to flip it around on you, Yvonne. What is the gifting rule for age pension? What's the gifting limit?
The gifting limit. Now, I think the gifting limit is around $10,000 per year, or a limit of $30,000 over a 5-year period.
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
So that's what it's often called the gifting limit. But
okay.
People don't understand what that means. So what happens if you gift more than $10,000 in a financial year? What is the big bad penalty that happens if you exceed this limit? And this is the thing that's so poorly understood, that it's actually not a limit. It is a gifting-free area, if you like. So you can actually give away as much money as you like. You can give away hundreds of thousands of dollars if you want to. The gifting rule is really about how much of the gift will Centrelink acknowledge is gone from your assets. Yeah, you can give more than $10,000, but you can't reduce your assets by more than $10,000 in a financial year by gifting. So that's the big difference. The limit is not $10,000. The gifting free area, or the allowable gift, is $10,000 per financial year, with a maximum of $30,000 in 5 financial years, or a rolling 5-year period, rather.
Thank you, Rebecca, and very cheeky of you to ask me the question, but I appreciate where we're going with this, and let's now get granular. So does gifting itself reduce the age pension amount?
Yeah, so this is another one that people think that, well, if there's a limit for something, then if I exceed the limit, then something bad must happen. It must reduce my pension. This is not the case. So when you make a gift, if you're gifting from something that Centrelink is already assessing, so let's say you have $100,000 in a bank account, you've declared that money to Centrelink, Centrelink know you have the $100,000, and then you give away some of that money. Maybe you give it to your grandchild or your son, or you give it away to a charity, whatever. When you tell Centrelink, oh, I've given away $10,000, then that actually reduces your assets. And if you're on a part age pension, reducing your assets actually means it increases your pension, your fortnightly pension. So gifting actually increases your pension, if anything, if you're gifting from something that's already being assessed by Centrelink. We'll circle back around to that later on, because sometimes people give things away that are not already being assessed by Centrelink, and that's where it does get quite tricky.
That's really helpful, Rebecca. So gifting $10,000, it's like a free area, and then often there's the phrase that there's a penalty for gifting over this amount. And I know we're working this bit by bit, but what actually is meant by a penalty for these people?
So from Centrelink's perspective, the penalty is just that Centrelink will consider that you still have that money for 5 years. So going back to this example of, if I've got $100,000 in my bank account, if I decided to give all of that $100,000 to my son, maybe to help him buy his first house or whatever, I would tell Centrelink, this bank account that had $100,000 in it is now zero and closed. There's no money in there. Centrelink will reduce my assets by $10,000. So there's a $10,000 gift that has disappeared off my assets. And then they create a pretend bank account with $90,000 in it, because that's the amount over the $10,000 allowable amount. So they've got this pretend bank account on my record, and they write in there $90,000 deprived asset, and they date stamp it with today's date. So that pretend bank account just sits on my record for 5 years. So when Centrelink's working out how much age pension I get, they count that $90,000 pretend bank account as part of my assets. So my pension won't go up much. It'll go up a little bit because I've given the $10,000, but it won't go up much. Now, after 5 years, it's been date stamped. So after 5 years, that $90,000 pretend bank account disappears and it's no longer on my record. So at the 5-year mark, my pension will go up significantly if I'm not already at the full rate of pension, as that $90,000 drops off. So the penalty is just that gift is still recorded as a pretend amount on my record for 5 years. That's all the penalty is. It just means that you can't reduce your assessable assets quickly by gifting. You have to wait the 5-year period.
That is really clear. And you've mentioned this rolling 5-year look-back rule. Perhaps people might look at that in relation to age pension and they actually plan to give at a younger age. Would you like to just mention that for a moment?
Yeah, so if you know that you're not going to be claiming any Centrelink payments or concession cards until you turn 67 and reach that magic age for age pension, then you can plan ahead. And if you're planning to give away large sums of money, you might decide to do that before you turn 62. So then when you turn 67 and Centrelink asks you to declare any gifts made in the previous 5 years, you will be able to honestly say, no, I have not made any gifts in the last 5 years, because you made them all before you turned 62. Now, the important thing to note here is that a couple is assessed as a single financial entity. So if you're 62 but your partner is 65 and you make a gift to your family member, in your case, it's not going to affect your age pension because by the time you're 67, it's been 5 years. But for your partner who's a bit older, they will have to declare that amount when they apply at 67 because it's within their 5-year period. You just need to figure that out. So for couples, it might mean you have to do it even earlier than a single. But even if you do give away money, say 2 years before you reach age pension age, you can still do it. It just means that when at 67, that amount will be on your record for the first 3 years of age pension. So it's a rolling 5-year period. When you apply for a Centrelink payment, age pension or any other income support payment, one of the questions is, have you given away money or sold any assets for less than market value in the last 5 years? And you're required to write that down. So this is important for people who maybe they are thinking about claiming job seeker payment before age pension, maybe at 64 or whatever. You're going to need to declare those gifts. Also, if you're planning on applying for a low income card, which is a healthcare card, they do look at gifting for that as well. So age 62 is not a free-for-all for everybody because some people might be claiming payments before they turn 67.
That's really helpful, Rebecca. So just to be clear, if one is gifting, say, a $10,000 in that first instance, would they actually get a little more age pension?
Yes, if your assets are over the threshold for a full pension. So if you're going to be getting a part pension, if you give away $10,000, you are reducing your assets, so that will increase your age pension amount.
Fantastic. And now, Rebecca, broadly, what are some considerations before making a gift, please?
Well, firstly is to make sure that you will be okay financially without that money. So you're giving away some money, you're not going to have access to that capital anymore. So the money has gone from your account or your super or wherever you've taken it from. And also the interest, the income that money generates will no longer be available to you. If you've got money in super that's accumulating, growing more and more each month, and you're not going to have access to that income or bank interest or anything. So, yeah, firstly is to make sure that you will actually be okay without the money. Other things to consider is how it's going to affect relationships. So sometimes gifting can change the flavour of a relationship, and you just want to make sure that it's the right thing to do in your situation. I'd think about if there's other family members that might not approve of what you're doing. Doesn't mean you don't do it, but you just might want to think about how you're going to explain this to everyone in the family. Does it have implications for your will or your estate? Maybe you're giving one son extra money now and maybe they'll get less inheritance, or whatever you're doing. It should be something that you think about and everyone knows what you're doing and understands why you're doing it. You don't want people to have a sour taste when you've done something that you're intending to be a good thing. And in terms of that, all that sort of stuff, probably a good idea to talk to your lawyer, estate planner, to help navigate all of that.
And that's so important, just to say that perhaps don't just make this quick decision, do your homework and do get some advice, get some personal advice here. So a good time to remind everyone that this is always information only and never personal advice. Rebecca, does the gifting rule, do these rules only apply to the giver?
Yes, they do. So the gifting rule is only about giving, so they apply to the giver. So sometimes we see questions like, oh, I'm on job seeker payment or I'm on disability payment and my mum wants to give me $20,000 to buy a new car or whatever it is. Is this going to be a problem because it's more than $10,000? The $10,000 limit or gifting free area only applies to the giver. So there's no rule about receiving a gift, about how much you can receive. So if you're on a Centrelink payment and somebody says, hey, I want to replace your car, I'm going to buy you a brand new car, that's fantastic. And, you can just be grateful for that. It's not going to upset your Centrelink payments. If you are on a Centrelink payment and you receive a gift, whether that's a car or a financial gift, you do need to tell Centrelink about it. And if it's a large sum of money, it may impact your payments because it is a new asset, but you're not going to get in trouble for receiving more than $10,000 worth of money or vehicle or whatever it is. You just update your assets and Centrelink may need to adjust your payment, but yeah, the gifting rule does not apply to the person receiving the gift. And there is no gift tax in Australia. So if you give $100,000 to your child or your grandchild, they don't have to pay tax on it. It's not considered income. It's a transfer of assets and there is no gift tax in Australia.
That's great, Rebecca. Now, our next question is about process. And I had a bit of a chat with Rebecca before we went on air. I'm going to make this a really deep dive into both if someone intended to make a gift and we don't want to breach the rules, and of course, if someone is wanting to find out if the rules that Centrelink has handed down are fair. Rebecca, I know that you read about this topic and you understand the whys of what's going on here. Would you mind taking a moment to explain these processes to our listeners?
Yeah, so if you make a gift of money, you should update your Centrelink assets online, telling Centrelink what you've done. If you're thinking, oh, I'd like to give a large sum of money to someone in my family, one resource you can use is the Financial Information Service at Centrelink, and you can explain your plan to them and they can help you understand how it will affect your payments. So that's a really helpful thing to do. So that's the Financial Information Service, or FIS, at Centrelink, and you call them on 132 300 and say, financial information service when you're prompted, and you'll get straight through to them and you can have a chat over the phone, or if it's a bit more complicated, you can book an appointment either in person or by phone or video, and they can just help you understand how the rules work, how it's going to apply to your situation, how your pension's going to be affected. So that's one thing you can do before making a gift. And then if you've made a gift, or if there's any Centrelink decision, you get a letter about, oh, this is your new rate of payment and this is what we are using to determine your payment, and they might list your assets, and they list on there a deprived asset of $90,000, for example. Now, if you disagree with a decision that Centrelink has made, there is a process to ask for it to be reviewed. Now, any letter that you get from Centrelink will say it on there. If you read the full letter and both sides of the page, it goes on to say, yeah, if you disagree with this decision, you can ask for a review, and it gives you phone numbers and that sort of thing. So every Centrelink decision is reviewable. You can call the number on the letter, or you can submit a form, which is an SS351 form, which is to explain or review a Centrelink decision. You fill out that form and upload it onto your account, and it will be sent to an authorised review officer, or ARO. These are people who are more senior, more experienced, and they will look at the decision that's been made and look at what you say in form that you think is wrong with the decision. They will have a bit of a more careful look into it and decide whether they think that the original decision by Centrelink was correct or incorrect, and then they have the power to change the decision, which may be to your advantage. Once that review has been done, even if you still don't agree with it, you can have that appealed at a higher level. So there's something called the Administrative Review Tribunal, which is an independent place where it reviews the federal level decisions. Like in Victoria, we have the VCAT, the Victorian Civil Administrative Tribunal, where those kind of decisions can be reviewed. At the federal level, the Commonwealth level, because Centrelink is federal, they have this tribunal. So there's two levels of the ART. So you can ask for an appeal at the first level, and you make your case, Centrelink make their case, and an independent review officer from the tribunal will decide who's right. And they may decide in Centrelink's favour, or they may decide in your favour. Now, let's say you bring an appeal to the tribunal and they decide in your favour. Centrelink has 28 days to appeal that decision. So Centrelink can take it to the next level, or if you're not happy with the decision, you can also take it to the next level. So the second review of the ART, and it's looked at again, and you can bring more evidence. Centrelink can also bring more evidence. Centrelink does have powers to dig quite deep. They can ask for bank records and lots of things. If you ever want to have a look at the ART decisions, you can see that they do get quite a lot of information. They can pry quite deeply into your affairs. So, you don't want to do this if you're, trying to pull the wool over their eyes, because they can really find out lots of stuff about you. But you can certainly take it to the second review, and then decision, who was right? Is Centrelink been right all along, or were they wrong and this should have been a different decision? So that's the Administrative Review Tribunal, and they publish some of their decisions, especially at that second level. The published decisions help to explain the processes behind, explains the legislation, the rules, what things do Centrelink use to decide on what's what your assets are, what the gifts are, whatever it is. So I find it really helpful to look at those decisions, because it just explains really nicely and clearly how Centrelink applies the legislation to people's situations and to determining what payments they're eligible for. So there you go. That was quite lengthy, but there is a process to review any decision that Centrelink has made about your payment.
Absolutely wonderful and so helpful. And now we're beginning to understand the level of reading that our Rebecca does and finds absolutely fascinating. If someone wants to give a large amount, why would accurate record keeping be important?
Yeah, so record keeping is always important. If you're doing large amounts with Centrelink, it is really important to have accurate records. So people can get into hot water when they're wishy-washy about things. They might say a loan or a gift, and some people use those words interchangeably, and they're completely different things. A loan is not a gift is not a loan. Some people will try and say, oh, well, yeah, I gave $100,000 to my son, but it wasn't a gift because it was really, I was repaying a loan that he made to me however many years ago. If you are, in fact, repaying a loan, maybe your son did give you $100,000 and you're repaying that. If you have the paperwork saying that in 2002, my son loaned me $100,000 and said you can pay it back with no interest, if you've got that paperwork, it makes the process much easier. Centrelink can say, oh, yeah, there you go. There's that paperwork. It's a properly documented loan and you're just repaying it. It's not a gift. Now, this is one of the cases that I came across in the tribunal decisions. An elderly man had transferred a large sum of money to his adult son, and there were conflicting reports about whether this money was a gift, whether it was repayment of a loan that the son had loaned the father money many years ago, whether it was payment for a granny flat that the son had constructed on his property for the elderly father to live in, or whether it was an early inheritance, which is basically the same as a gift. But the wording you use around these things, it does matter. And this elderly man's pension, it was reduced quite a lot because Centrelink deemed it as a gift. The man and the son spent a lot of time, and it took them a lot of work to eventually show to Centrelink that there was an understanding that it was repayment of a loan from many years ago. But that whole process took a considerable amount of time and energy to get the decision that they were after. If they had proper paperwork from the start, at the time the son loaned the money to the father many years ago, if they had paperwork from back then, it just would have made it so much easier. The paperwork would have been there. The father could easily say, I am now, I've sold my house and I am repaying my son this money that he lent me on this exact date that we've got paperwork for. And that would have just been so much easier for Centrelink to see that it was not a gift, it was just repayment of a loan. This is just an example of why it's really important to have that paperwork and documentation sorted out. And don't call things a gift when it's a loan. Don't call it a loan when it's a gift. Those two words have completely different meanings. So don't get it mixed up.
That is really clear. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And we'll just have one more question before we bump into our group from the Facebook group, 3 questions. Related to record keeping, finally, why is it important to keep our assets updated? In other words, the correct value of our assets with Centrelink. Why is that so important?
Well, it's important because that's how Centrelink pays you the correct rate of your age pension. And people can get, I guess, a bit lax with it when they're on full age pension. So, once your assets have dropped below the threshold for full pension, some people feel like, oh, well, I'm getting full pension anyway, so it doesn't really matter whether I've got, $300,000 in super or 150. What's the difference? It doesn't affect my pension. And it may not affect your pension, but things can change. So as an example, currently the deeming rates for the income test are very low, but that could change in July next year. And if your records are accurate, then you're going to be getting the correct rate of payment as the rules change. If your records are not accurate, like maybe you've withdrawn lots of money to renovate your home, you haven't updated that to Centrelink. If they change the rules, they change the deeming rates, for example, they could reduce your pension because according to their records, you've got all this money in the bank. And that wouldn't be nice to have your pension reduced. So, yeah, that's like one reason to keep your records accurate. Another reason is that if you were to go into aged care, then Centrelink's going to need that information to be accurate and current. So it's going to make that process easier as well. Or if, sadly, if your spouse was to pass away, Centrelink's going to reassess your pension amount based on the single assets and income tests rather than couple. And so having all the details kept accurate just makes everything a lot smoother and easier.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That is so helpful. Amongst other things, you mentioned aged care. And just to let our listeners know, we will be presenting a series on aged care to you. Now we're going to have a look at 3 questions from our Facebook group. Of course, this is never personal advice and information only. Ian asks, if I am to receive an inheritance, can it be distributed directly to my children at settlement without it being considered a gift from me?
No. So if you're named to receive the inheritance, then once the settlement happens, that's your money. And you can then gift it on to your children if you want to, but it is considered a gift because that was your money and you've decided to give it. If you wanted to do that differently, you need to get to the person before they've passed and ask them to change their will, because the money goes to you, it's your money, and then it's a gift if you pass it on.
That's really clear. Thank you, Rebecca. Pete asks, a couple have some individually held assets. If one spouse dies and their will says to leave the individual assets to a child or grandchild, is that considered a gift and therefore affects the pension of the surviving spouse?
So this is a really good question. So it's kind of linked to the first question from Ian. So in this case, the will says that this money in the bank account that's an individual asset goes to child A, and maybe this superannuation account goes to child B. So those individually held assets that the will says go out to other people, that is not a gift from the surviving spouse because it's not an asset that the surviving spouse owns. So this is a way that if you get your estate planning done properly, you can make the assets go to exactly who you want, and it's not a gift. So the surviving spouse will have their own individual assets plus any joint assets that were jointly held and determined to go to the surviving spouse. In that way, like Centrelink's only going to assess the surviving spouse on what they are left with after their spouse dies. So that sort of shows where estate planning and getting your wills done properly, well, it helps your surviving spouse to get the right amount of assets left to them and can help to protect the surviving spouse's entitlement to age pension and helps you to pass on assets to other people without it being considered a gift. And in terms of how you do all that, that's totally beyond my level of knowledge, and you'd need to go see your estate planning lawyers, etc.
Thank you so much. Finally, Andrew asks, can I withdraw or can I redraw from my mortgage and give the money to my kids? How would that affect my age pension?
Okay, so this is the one I sort of earmarked right at the start of the episode. So if you give money that is already being assessed by Centrelink, like from a bank account or a car that you own that you're going to give to somebody, or superannuation that's in your name and you're over 67, you're giving away assets that are already being assessed by Centrelink, so you are reducing your assets. Now, Andrew's question is kind of the opposite of that, because he's talking about redrawing from his mortgage, and we will assume that's his home mortgage. Your home that you live in is an exempt asset. So maybe Andrew lives in a home that's worth $2 million, and that whole $2 million asset is exempt from testing by Centrelink. Now, he may be able to redraw from his mortgage, or maybe he gets a reverse mortgage on his property, on his home, and that releases some money that he then gives to his kids. But because he has accessed an exempt asset and converted it into cash, that actually has a negative effect on his pension. So let's say his property is worth $2 million and he redraws $500,000 from his mortgage, or gets a reverse mortgage of $500,000 and gives that money to his kids. When he updates Centrelink, he needs to tell them that I've given $500,000 to my kids, and $10,000 of that is the allowable gift. So $10,000 will just go if he hasn't made gifts previously. But Centrelink will create, like I talked about before, this pretend bank account on his record, and the pretend bank account has $490,000 in it because that's the amount he's given to his kids. So maybe his other assets, maybe he's got a car and a bit of super, whatever else. Maybe he's got $100,000 in other assets and was receiving the full pension. Now, this pretend bank account of $490,000 is added to that asset, and that's going to reduce his age pension. So because he's accessed money that was previously hidden from Centrelink and exempt in his primary home, he has increased his accessible assets and reduced his age pension. So that would generally be advised against, that Andrew would be reducing his age pension by doing that and maybe not really be able to afford to do that. So if you're thinking about that, thinking of redrawing from your mortgage or getting a reverse mortgage on your home in order to help your family, please, please, please get advice on that before you go ahead. Because, if Andrew was just going to go and do that, it's quite tricky to undo. You can't unscramble that egg. So, yeah, do get advice before doing things like that. The other thing that would be similar to that is, say you've got a couple where one's younger than 67 and one's older. If the younger partner was to take money from their superannuation and give it to family, that, again, is taking an exempt asset, the super in accumulation under age 67, and converting it into an accessible asset, as in the gift, the pretend bank account, with the amount of money that you've given to your child. So this is where the penalty word comes in, because people might look at the whole situation and go, oh, I can just give some money away and it's going to reduce my assets. Well, it only reduces your assets if the asset was being assessed by Centrelink in the first place. So this is where it really can be a penalty if you have gifted money without thinking through exactly how it's going to affect you.
That was a wonderful answer, and I absolutely love the way you have used this complex situation to tie it back to earlier conversations and concepts. So well done, Rebecca. Thank you. Remember that this is only information, never personal advice. For our international listeners who wish to join the Age Pension, Super and Retirement Facebook group, our code word is RED. And I'd like to say thank you once again to the wonderful Rebecca. This has been a learning episode for me, and I look forward to continuing learning with you over the coming weeks.
You're welcome, Yvonne. It was great to be here again.